As I mentioned before, we're really grateful to have punk6529 with us here virtually. Obviously, punk6529 is anonymous, so couldn't join us in person. But we're very excited to hear about the challenges and opportunities present in self-custody from one of the biggest proponents of self-custody, digital identity, and probably one of the most influential NFT maxis out there. So if you can come back to your seats, we'll give you maybe 30 seconds, and then I'll let you know when you can go. Okay, it sounds like you can't hear the intro, so 30 seconds, and we'll give them the thumbs up. All right, I think we're good. Punk6529, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'd like to break my remarks into 3 buckets. The first is what we do and how we use SAFE in what we do, because I think it's important for the next 2 buckets. And the other 2 are, what are areas of potential improvement and opportunities in the more institutional space? And what are the areas and opportunities and potential improvements in the more consumer space? Because I believe these are both relevant and they're both different. And so, because I'm sure some people know who we are and what we do, but some don't, I think this initial context will be helpful for the later remarks. So the animating mission of 6529 is that NFTs are very important, and they are very important as we go to a more digitized world. And they're specifically important because as we enter a world of quote unquote the metaverse, and for us, the metaverse is simply the internet, but with better visualization and persistent digital objects. We are all going to have many, many digital objects, right? Beyond our normal fungible ones, whether it's fiat at JP Morgan Chase or Ether in a custodian, or more ideally, non-custodially held. We're also going to have a large variety of non-fungible objects. They could be PFPs, they could be avatars, they could be fine art, they could be pop art, they could be game objects, they could be various identity and membership objects, they could be IP related, they could be brand related. In time, they will represent quote unquote real world assets or off-chain assets beyond native assets. We're almost certainly the most bullish people in the world about the breadth of how important NFTs are going to be. And I say this as someone who has been in the crypto space since 2013. And I couldn't be more bullish about Bitcoin and Ethereum and all of the well-known fungible tokens. But the difference between those and NFTs is that NFTs will enable a much richer expression of organizational, human, personal activity in a decentralized manner. There are certain things that fungible tokens are good at, mediums of exchange, or smart contract gas, or stores of value, maybe. But beyond that, it's hard to express complicated organizational structures, complicated activities, fine-grained activities with fungible tokens. So everything we say going forward from this is based on this worldview that NFTs are very important. NFTs can represent the type of activities that we weren't able to represent in a digitalized, decentralized manner before. And it's an opportunity now to find a way for it to work for consumers and institutions. And here I think there's a very, very important point. The only way crypto or any type of crypto wins is by winning in the marketplace. I have spent a decade of my life preaching to people about the power of decentralization, and it basically does not work, right? Like the number of people who are interested in decentralization as a matter of principle and not because it makes their life easier or better is very small. It's 1%, it's 2%, it's 3%. It's not 0%, but you don't get mass consumer adoption. You don't get mass institutional adoption because something is theoretically better. You get mass consumer adoption because something is practically better. People can use it and are happier using it. And so we're at a critical period right now. It is not yet established who will own the horizontal layer, who will own the database for metaverse objects. As with fungible tokens, there are only two methods for digital databases in 2023. The first is a regular normal database that in practice in the technology industry will be owned by a large corporation, and realistically, one of 10 large corporations. The only other method is a decentralized public blockchain. There's no third method, right? And I think it's very important when you're talking to regulators, when you're talking to people in power, people don't understand the decentralized world where they say, well, here are all the problems with decentralization, with crypto and blockchains, and most of them are true. They're actually problems. But the only other alternative is that this digital layer for what will be a fairly all-encompassing digital world will be owned by Google or Apple or Facebook or possibly some of the gaming companies, something in that direction. So we have a choice as a society. We have a choice as a group of individuals who care about decentralization, about which direction to take this. But the choice or victory is not going to come by explaining to people that it's better if the centralized solution works better. We have to actually beat centralized solutions on the merits. We can't just beat them on the principles. So these are my priors, and normally I'd speak about this for a while, but this is a more technical conference, so I'd like to get into more technical and specific, let's call it user experience with SAFE. So in the NFT space, not in the fungible treasury space, we are probably the largest user of SAFE in the world. We use SAFEs in two areas of our operations. One for the 6529 museum, which are the NFTs I/we have bought personally and plan to hold forever. We believe they should only be held and in time only displayed on decentralized systems. This is the core underlying principle we believe in, right? So taking these NFTs and then putting them in a centralized custodian or showing them primarily in a centralized application violates the whole spirit and mission of what we're trying to do. So we keep those in a safe. We also run, I think, the world's largest NFT fund. It's an SEC regulated fund. It has a variety of compliance obligations. It has sophisticated investors, lawyers, accountants, auditors, and so on. And we hold all the fund assets in a series of safes. And these series of safes are for different parts of the fund or different assets of the fund. And we'll talk about what that means. Now, why do we use safes in the first place? What's the good part about them? What is the part that, one of the things I tell people, there are very few products or services in the NFT space that I consider indispensable to what we do. Safe is at the top of that list. Because if we are holding important NFTs, valuable NFTs for the museum, or important and valuable NFTs as a fiduciary to investors, our single number one priority before we get into other priorities is we cannot lose them, right? We cannot allow them to be stolen, phished, hacked, and so on. We are not comfortable with any other alternative than SAFE. As in September 2023, we have multi-signatures. Safes, our keys are distributed around the world. Our keys are distributed around team members. Our keys are kept cold. We don't travel with them. We never have sufficient consensus in the same place. It's pretty good, not great, pretty good on the security side. So it works. Here are the parts, though, that I think need to be further developed for us to go to the next level. First issue is it's hugely inconvenient, right? One of the interesting thing about NFTs is you can do things with them. You can vote on proposals, you can mint derivative NFTs, you can compose them into games and galleries and so on. And obviously, you're not going to do that from a vault. Obviously, you're not going to connect the wallet that you care about to any arbitrary service, because eventually you will lose the NFTs, right? Eventually you will make a mistake. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I started tweeting about this because this was a very obvious problem for us, that the solution to these types of activities is what is known as delegation. And there are now multiple delegation solutions out there. We have built one ourselves called NFT delegation that we think is the most tuned not to trading or trading assets or generating value from delegation rights, but it is the safest version because it pulls in the concept of a delegation manager. So what you can say is you will do one transaction once from the safe to the delegation contract that doesn't ask for any token permissions. It puts in place a delegation manager, which will be in practice either an EOA or another safe if you want. And that delegation manager assigns delegations further to other addresses. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you own a CryptoPunk. You could say, if anyone wants to make available derivatives to be minted from this punk, they can be minted from this address. If someone wants to play this punk in a game, they can be played from another address. If someone wants to have an event for punk holders in Los Angeles, they can use it from this address, and so on and so forth. I believe this issue now is solved in theory, but not solved in communication and ease of use. So we've been, not with SAFE specifically, but we've been trying to explain these concepts of delegation to a broad group of people within the 6529 community. And I will admit the same challenge that it's complicated. To do this fully safely, the way I described, you need multiple transactions. You have multiple concepts you have to raise to people. You have to explain to them layers and layers of abstraction. And so far, it is a exercise of manually talking to people or writing to people for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes for them to understand it. It's got to get easier. I think here we have hit the point that technically it's solved, but it needs to be easier. Let's go to the second institutional point. The second institutional point is large public figures, large collections of NFTs still are vulnerable to wrench attacks, even with a safe. It's one of the reasons I'm pseudonymous. It's the main reason I'm pseudonymous. So let's say, I don't know, I have 460,000 Twitter followers, and let's say they all knew who I was. Are there 1,000 crazy people in that group? Yeah, I think so. Would someone someday show up to my house with a baseball bat and start hitting me over the head? Probably. Would they get the Grail NFTs if they did that? No. I don't have the keys here. So that's good. The bad thing, though, is I would get my head smashed in. And that's a different problem. And that is not solved today, even by having a safe with multiple keys. I've thought a lot about this topic, and I've thought a lot about what could be a solution. And I think it's in a couple of directions, both of which are still broadly unexplored, but very interesting. One direction, I would call it legible time locks. Let's say, for example, we famously own a Fidenza in the museum called the Tulip. I have no intention of selling the Tulip. There's no chance I'll ever want to transfer it. Okay. Could I time lock it for a year? Or even time delay it for a week? Could it be in a smart contract that even if the keys were all compromised, it still can't be moved for a week, a month, etc.? Is that legible to more or less, not the world's brightest person who is beating me on the head with a bat? Right? Like, interesting question. Because even though you say, oh, it's a sophisticated person who's going to do this type of attack, most criminals are not the brightest, right? At any level of brightness, you have a better risk reward not being a criminal, right? So it has to also be legible to a third party. That's one direction. A different direction. What would it look like if the key holders were legibly not me, while also preserving decentralization? So what does that mean? Well, it can't be like a 1 of 3 or 2 to 4, right? That probably looks more like a 6 of 11. And it's signed, one of the 6 of 11 is signed as Credit Suisse. So one of them could be former Credit Suisse, one of them could be Coinbase, some of it could be a foundation in Iceland. The challenges here are different, right? The challenges are, first of all, legibility again, that you can point someone to the screen and say, hey, guy, I don't sign this. You got to go beat up someone in a cave in Switzerland. But then you get into other challenges relating to a custodial nature and regulatory challenges. You would need a set of signers that are cross-jurisdiction. So if some jurisdiction says, yeah, you can't use decentralized NFTs anymore, you got to freeze these, the signers can obey the law, but still not break the general concept of the vault. You need a way to have enough control over it that you don't end up back in a custodial system. Because if you could just send it to Coinbase and use Coinbase as your custodian, but that defeats the whole purpose, right? You've just brought it right back in the custodian system. And once you're back in the custodial system, you might as well just be in the custodial system in the beginning. You don't have to go through all this aggravation. And so it's a very hard problem. It's a problem that I think even the theory is not there, let alone the practice. And I think it is quite important. We're at a phase in a deep NFT winter, and that's fine because it'll give us a couple of years to think about building infrastructure. But when we come out of this winter, there'll be a much broader set of institutional investors in NFTs. And if these issues are not solved, there are very few people like me willing to go through the level of aggravation, quote unquote risk. I have to explain to some, very serious investors that we hold the keys ourselves and no, we don't have them at Coinbase custody and blah, 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 right? Because Coinbase custody for fund managers is a safe choice. I have it at Coinbase custody. No one's going to fire you for having it at Coinbase custody. They've done a good job of not losing their tokens for a very long time. And to a typical limited partner, a typical institutional investor, that sounds like the right choice. It sounds weirder, wonkier, scarier that the team itself is holding them. Well, what if they run away with them? Right? How do I assure people that I'm not going to run away with them? Now, it's weird. You could run away with them at a centralized custodian as well, right? You have the rights to move them. But the perception is different. And so we have, I think, 1 or 2 years, build in the bear style, where it would be important to have both a theoretical framework and a practical framework of what is best practice for holding large amounts of institutional TradFi capital in a decentralized manner. I had actually spoken to a couple of very large institutional investors who were not ready to invest, but were open to this idea to discuss what they would need to see to be comfortable with a fund manager holding assets non-custodial. And part of, I think, these solutions, I think part of the solution is you have some of the traditional custodians as signers in a safe, right? And so I don't think the ideal solution is, oh, well, here's a bunch of team members and they hold all the keys. That feels wrong also. And so I flag this as a topic that needs further research, as a topic that needs a theoretical framework, and as a topic that ultimately is going to need engagement with the TradFi world. Otherwise, we're once again going to go into the niche and say, we will have decentralization among ideologically motivated people and organizations, but then when all the major institutions come, everything is going to be held in a centralized manner. And I think it's giving up. Third thing I will say that is, the SAFE teams know this, because I'm harassing them all the time about this. I do believe the native treatment of NFTs in SAFE still needs some work. It's gotten better, so I thank you for that. I still think it needs work. It should be treated as a first-class citizen in SAFE, but the team knows that I harass them about that all the time. So let's say this is the very high end. This is what people who are going to be holding hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars of NFTs worry about. Let's go to the other end, which is individuals, consumers, retail, normal people. And we have a ton of experience there as well, because we have a fun NFT collection called the Memes, where there's a lot of them. They're inexpensive. You can mint one for $100, and they have decentralization-oriented messages. So the reason I say this is not because they're a good or bad collection, but it's now at the $100 price point, not at the $100 million price point. And there's a community, I don't know, of 8,000 people that mint them, hold them, et cetera, with vastly different levels of sophistication. And that community, like all NFT communities, on any given day, manages to get phished. It happened yesterday with the phishing link on Vitalik's Twitter account. And I mean, you see that, right? I am sure Vitalik has good. So we had some members of the community lost some of their NFTs because, oh, look, a Vitalik NFT, it must be safe, right? And what I think the right answer is you need to get people onto a 3-address architecture, a vault, a trading account, and a minting account. Sounds easy. It's obvious. You never connect with your vault. You never connect with your trading account. It sounds easy, but some of the most sophisticated people, some of the richest people in the NFT space have gotten phished over the last year. I mean, very sophisticated people about security, people with a lot of NFTs. And then you go all the way down the line to area mom who's buying her first NFT. And this is still very complicated, because what you need is 3 addresses. You need delegation. And what I would really like to see, and we're a long way away from this in usability, I would love to see a world where people's first wallet was a safe, right? That if you're coming in, part of the reason run the memes, is to work on these issues, because I think UX in crypto tends to be poor for regular people. And so the types of issues we think about. I introduce a non-crypto friend to the memes. I send them to the website. They want to spend $100. How do they do all this without feeling like they have to do a full PhD course in computer science to do it safely? Because that's what it feels like now to do it safely, right? And yes, progress has been made since 2013 when we had paper wallets, and I mean, it was really a nightmare. But we haven't made enough progress on the front end, right? The back end is now okay. We know how to run smart contracts like Safe. We know the difference between smart contracts and EOAs, account abstraction, et cetera, all that. This stuff's fine, but it is not yet distilled into a front end format that a regular person can understand. And so we're doing a bunch of work ourselves there. It is extremely challenging because, I mean, I say all these things, and I've said these things on Twitter, and I'm saying it to you. And then I go look at how we describe to people in the memes and how they should organize their wallet and their delegation. And I'm reading our own text, and I'm thinking, my God, our text is crap. Like, I wouldn't understand this if I didn't already know this. And it's one of these challenges that is both is both real because the substance is difficult, but I think it's also organizational in nature, seeing what happens with us. We spend 98% of our time on development. And then the development team's like, all right, great, now let's put the front end and write some text. They spend 2% of their time. It's probably wrong, right? There should probably be 50%, 30% of resources purely on the communication and the UX. And I think most crypto firms don't do that. I think we don't do that. I think it is a hard cultural challenge internally to do that because it doesn't feel like the real work. The real work feels like, oh, we got to get this new feature out. We got to solve all these hard technical problems. We need to make sure our contract isn't hackable. That feels like the real work, the hard work, the smart work. But what I think that's a mistake. You know, you use Instagram or you use TikTok or you use an iPhone, and there's, of course, vast technical work in the background, but it's hidden. You know, I tell people, Instagram uses Python, but nobody has used Instagram because it uses Python. You use Instagram because it's easy and fun, and you post pictures of yourself at the beach. And all the back-end work is abstracted away, and all you see is an easy front end. And so I think this is where we have work to do. So I'm getting the 1 minute warning, so let me wrap up here. What my conclusions are the following. Safe is amazing. We use it all the time. We can't live without it. I think we have still significant work to do to make it institutional grade ready on the high end. And we have a different style of work to do to make it usable for a non-crypto person to be able to be onboarded to it in 5, 10, 15 minutes and be up and running. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the conference. I congratulate you on the work you're doing. I think it's super important for the ecosystem. And thank you so much for having me.